Hi, my name is Pamela Coons, Associate Professor of Medicine in the Division of Oncology at Yale School of Medicine and Yale Cancer Center. I'm excited to announce ASCO's new open access journal, JCO Oncology Advances. As the inaugural editor-in-chief, I hope to support JCO Oncology Advances to become the premier platform to bridge the gap between accessible scientific research and clinical care. Stay tuned for more information, including new article types, at ascopubs.org/JCO Oncology Advances. We look forward to seeing your submissions in spring of 2024.
Market, Gift, Everyday Ethics, and Emmanuel Levinas in Patient Care by Dr. Alan B. Astrow, MD. The patient was a 65-year-old woman, matter-of-fact in style, with a history of early-stage breast cancer, successfully treated 3 years ago with surgery and radiation therapy. She had a numerically low risk of recurrence, was taking hormonal medication to lower this risk, and recently had a normal mammogram. I am her medical oncologist and was seeing her to ensure that she remained cancer-free. I thought this would be a quick visit, but before leaving the examination room, I asked my patient, as a routine aspect of the visit, "How's your family?" She hesitated. "Well, my mother died in December." "Oh, very sorry to hear that. How old was she?" 98. "She lived a good long life, but still, it's very tough to lose your mom whenever it happens." "Yes, she lived with me. I miss her." Recently, Dr. Lydia Dugdale, director of the Columbia Center for Clinical Medical Ethics, gathered a group of physicians and creative artists to generate insights into a shared problem. Under the heading Medicine and the Art of Ethics, our group focused on commodity and gift with Lewis Hyde's The Gift, How the Creative Spirit Transforms the World, as prompt. In his 1983 classic, esteemed among creative artists, Hyde argued that works of art participate in both the market and gift economies. In a market economy, items are commodities offered for sale, while in a traditional gift economy, the economic basis for some indigenous tribal cultures, goods are offered freely. There is no requirement for payment, although there is a tacit understanding that at some point the gift will be reciprocated. Hyde did not deny the need for market-based buying and selling in the modern world, but argued that the market, dependent as it is on a degree of trust, assumes an unacknowledged dimension of gift, since the giving of a gift tends to establish a relationship between the parties involved. Creative artists understand that their native talent is, in part, a gift, and so the gift portion of the work places a constraint on their merchandising. A work of art can survive without the market, Hyde argued, but where there is no gift, there is no art. Medicine, too, has always inhabited the worlds of both market and gift. Someone must pay for medical services, but care, presence, and trust are also required. Can we place a price on these? Physicians work long and hard to perfect our craft, but might some element of our therapeutic abilities be seen, like the artist's native talent, as gift? Dugdale, like Hyde, argues for constraints on our merchandising and sees analogies between the fate of art and the fate of medicine. Where there is no gift, perhaps medicine's vital healing dimension disappears. The spirit of financialization has spread so deeply into our culture, though, that Dugdale's plaint may seem hopelessly idealistic. We see medicine portrayed as a business like any other, and have come to expect that hospitals will serve markets first and communities second if they wish to survive. Physicians accept that we are now primarily providers offering our wares to savvy consumers. Increasing numbers of physicians in more lucrative specialties have agreed to full commercialization by selling their practices to private equity. Concierge medicine continues to expand its reach, and the average person has increasing difficulty in accessing primary care. Financial discipline may help keep costs in line, and attention to customer service provides a necessary check on medical paternalism and institutional arrogance. The dimension of gift, in contrast, is an equally needed common-sense reminder that practicing medicine differs from, say, selling shoes, and comprises both an interpersonal and political dimension. On the personal level, giving a patient a bit more time than strict efficiency demands is gift. And philanthropic donations are clearly gifts, so is the practice of writing off charges. But some public policies serve the spirit of gift. Many vital medical services, mental health care for one, are money losers. And on a one-to-one level, patients long for human connection. The process of learning to turn the patient into a dollar, squeezing the dimension of gift from medicine, leads to unscrupulous cost shifting, turning poorly reimbursed illnesses into neglected cost centers while reducing sick persons to numbers. It is unlikely that this is an end that any of us, public or profession, wants, but the trend seems inexorable. Lewis Hyde himself, who spoke remotely to the gathering, had nothing to offer other than lament when asked what practical steps we might take to shore up the gift dimension of medicine. But interestingly, he suddenly recalled a telling episode from his own medical care. He had been instructed to use eye drops daily, a basic therapeutic measure, neither risky nor dangerous, but still chafed at the routine. He was prepared to ignore his ophthalmologist's entreaties until he and the ophthalmologist unexpectedly discovered a shared love for butterflies. Here, suddenly, was the gift, his doctor's interest in him as a person. Hyde found himself gladly willing to apply those cursed eye drops exactly as recommended. Medicine practiced at the highest professional level, Hyde suggests, requires both technical skill and personal connection. But how many doctors amid a pressured day have the time to get to know their patients, time for small talk? And are ordinary human expressions of concern for our patients gift, or just good medical care, grace note, or main note? The case might be that it is a main note, intrinsic to good care, but a note increasingly muted or not sounded at all. We know what we ought to do, but too often fall short. Daniel Callahan, the late eminent bioethicist, suffered from pulmonary and neurologic ailments toward the end of his life and observed, "I will note that of the well over 20 doctors who have cared for me in the last 10 years, only 2 have asked me anything about my life or my emotional state." We need a conceptual nudge. Otherwise, we are left stranded at the lowest common denominator of value, money. Institutions may measure the end in the flow of dollars, but the beginning lies in a generous spirit, in awareness, and in a way of thinking and acting that places protection of the vulnerable human person and enhancement of the quality of human relationship front and center. This spirit ought to shape both personal relationships and the larger systems that influence relationships. Where might we find a source for that generous spirit? Here, I note one such crucial effort, that of French-Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, to identify a philosophical basis for both the personal and political orientation toward gift. Levinas, in whom there has been nearly an explosion of interest in recent decades, drew a sharp contrast between the ethos of bottom-line accounting and that of selfless concern for the well-being of others. He argued as first premise that the world is here so that the ethical order has the possibility of being fulfilled. To make his case, however, he blurred the line between religious and secular thought. Levinas considered himself a secular philosopher foremost, also an observant, although pluralistic in outlook, Jew, and he did not hesitate to reference Jewish sacred texts for gleanings of secular wisdom. But he makes a claim that may speak to the experience of all clinicians, the spontaneous ethical response to the one facing us, to the presence of the other in need, is what distinguishes the human. Levinas interprets stories from another time and place in a way that sees them as less than a code of dictated conduct, but more than imaginative literature, narrative medicine of a sort, but one in which some consider the text under study sacred. His explication of the narrative of the Mount Sinai revelation, as recounted in the book of Exodus, opens the way for an existential, secular, and humanistic reading. The account in which the ancient Israelites in the Sinai desert accept without preconditions a divine teaching works for Levinas partly as a counter-metaphor to the reduction of person to dollar. As individuals and as a collective, these newly liberated refugees model an unconditional commitment to the good, to the pursuit of the ethical life as an act of inspiration rather than of calculation. Levinas was a philosopher and not a health policy expert, but he was also an experienced person in the world, having survived World War II in a Nazi prisoner of war camp and devoted much of his work life to running a school system in France for North African Jewish children from working class families. He understood economic realities, but as a great humanist, would likely have advised that in shaping policy, we ought to be mindful of the inner values at stake, the underlying source for those rights and privileges we hold dear. For the healing professions, as a prerequisite to our privileged status, Levinas might agree that we ought to experience ourselves collectively as commanded to be available to the vulnerability of the other person, and that we need to work out what this means for the concrete details of practice. Professional organizations might move beyond the understandable efforts to protect the financial positions of their members to a wider concern for the culture of medicine, the organization of medical care, the large-scale structural issues, the payment system, and the focus of the electronic medical record as examples that wear down even the most compassionate physician. But these are the macro issues. In the presence of vast economic forces, do the efforts of individual doctors matter at all? I took a short break and by chance ran across my patient in the lobby. "Hi, Dr. Astrow," she said with a smile. "You're my favorite doctor. Patients can love us one day and despise us the next. And Levinas reminds us, in any case, that an ethical encounter like that between a doctor and a patient ought to be entirely about the patient and about the patient's needs, not at all about the doctor. I relate this anecdote only to show that a simple and brief human gesture, in this case, an inquiry about a patient's family, followed by acknowledgement of her unexpectedly discovered sense of loss, that she missed her mom, may turn a routine visit into a healing encounter. We now find ourselves in a place where it is possible to imagine medicine without such ordinary exchanges, with doctors at the service of computer screens and the human dimension to care reduced to a frill. Beyond the anecdote, the diminishment of human connection between doctor and patient points to a larger loss, the loss of rich relationships as we increasingly digitize and financialize human interactions. It is important for us to think and argue about what this means for humane medical practice and beyond that, because medical encounters carry such weight and bear so many of our existential hopes and fears. What changes in our medical culture may portend for the culture at large.
Hello and welcome to JCO's Cancer Stories, The Art of Oncology, which features essays and personal reflections from authors exploring their experience in the field of oncology. I'm your host, Dr. Lidia Schapira, Associate Editor for Art of Oncology and a Professor of Medicine at Stanford University. Today, we are joined by Dr. Alan Astrow, Chief of the Hematology and Medical Oncology Division at the New York Presbyterian Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. In this episode, we will be discussing his Art of Oncology article, Market, Gift, Everyday Ethics, and the Emmanuel Levinas in Patient Care. At the time of this recording, our guest has no disclosures. Alan, welcome to our podcast and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Your article has a very long title, and we've got markets and gifts and ethics and a philosopher. So let's start by helping our listeners and maybe our readers to really understand the intention of this essay. What is the message of the essay?
The message of the essay is that we need to be reflecting and be mindful of the values that underlie medical care as we practice every day.
And if I were to quiz you a little bit on that and push a little bit, what are those values and how does perhaps market conflict with ethics and mission?
Trust, caring, honesty, thoroughness, dedication to the patient, focus on the patient and the patient's needs. The problem with market, or the danger of market, is that it can sometimes distract us from focusing on the patient and that patient's needs.
So how would you respond to somebody who says, but we need organization, we need markets and finances in order to have a system that provides healthcare? Where do you see the front of conflict, perhaps, between those who are more mission-driven, as you've just beautifully articulated, and have the trust in the patient's care front and center, and those who are more concerned with the productiveness and efficiency and collections?
I have tremendous respect for my administrative colleagues who are focused on keeping hospitals solvent. I worked at a hospital earlier in my career that was not focused as it needed to be on making sure that the hospital had a sound strategic plan. And that hospital is now condominiums. So absolutely, we need to be aware of financial realities, and hospitals need to pay their bills. But underlying that, we can't think that the first mission of a hospital is to earn money. The first mission of a hospital is to provide service to those in need. And then our colleagues in administration have to help us find ways to do that in a manner that's financially responsible. But we think first of the patient and that patient's needs. And patients understand that. Patients don't want the hospitals to go bankrupt, and patients want their doctors and nurses to be paid. Patients do worry sometimes, with good reason, I think, that the system may be overly focused. That's the issue. It's an issue of balance. Overly focused on markets, overly focused on finance. It seems as if we're living in a world in which money is driving everything. Money is speaking with too loud a voice. That's the issue. Money is important, but the needs of the patient and what our mission is to patients have to be the driving force of the hospital. That has to be the predominant voice, the loudest voice. Markets should be serving the patient and the patient's needs, not the other way around.
I think I understand that clearly. But now let's talk about the gift that's in the title, and that, in my mind, was a very imaginative way of presenting what we bring that is not just a service. Talk a little bit about how you understand the gift of presence or the gift of caring.
The gift is when you're really lost in the task itself, when you're really focused on that patient in front of you and trying to understand the patient and trying to address the concerns that the patient has. And during those moments, when you're focused on that patient, you're not thinking about money. No, you should not be. But the first predominant impulse needs to be what the underlying mission of that organization is. And in medicine, it's caring for the patient. And so, for example, when we hear administrators saying, we're going to reach out to this and that market, well, that to me shows a mistaken focus. We understand that the hospitals need to raise money from banks and other places in order to make needed capital investments. But we need to think first and foremost about the people and the communities we serve. And then the markets should be at the service of people and communities. I think in general, it's a larger issue. The power of money is speaking in too dominant in a way in too many aspects of our world. And medicine, above all, needs to resist that. And there's a manner in which healthcare institutions are functioning these days, which I think lead patients to have reason to doubt. And so if they have doubts about what our primary interests are, they will lose trust. And the loss of trust is devastating to the medical relationship.
Let me explore that a little bit with you, Alan. I would say that in my mind, providing that caring presence is part of the mission of medicine. But you talk about a dimension of gift. Help me and our listeners and readers understand a little bit more about the gift. You talk about the gift being something that's exchanged, that there's even a reciprocity in giving and receiving gifts. How are we to understand that, perhaps through the lens of the philosophers and the big thinkers here?
I'm borrowing this from Lewis Hyde. He was referring to a traditional gift economy. And according to Hyde, who is taking this from cultural anthropologists, that in many tribal communities, tribal societies, for example, the Native American cultures in our land that were not cash-based, they're based upon a notion of gift. You would provide a gift to the other without any expectation of payment. But there was a tacit understanding that at some point that gift would be returned to you. And that's how these societies, according to cultural anthropologists. Of course, it's probably hard to pin this down, but that's the way Hyde has presented it. This was the basis of the economy of gift-oriented cultures, and he was surmising that there's always an element of gift. He felt it was particularly in the world of creative arts, because if the artist is just thinking about how he or she could make money, their work is not likely to be very good. The artist needs to focus first on the gift dimension to it, the part that comes to them really as a gift. Your talent is a gift, and you may be able to see that your talent as a physician is a gift. And so much of our skill really comes from the gifts that others have given us in a way. Just think of our training. We think about how hard we work, and it's true, and how many years we gave into our training. But isn't it also true that we learned from the illnesses of others? They share their stories. They share their experiences with us, even when we didn't know that much. And we didn't have that much to offer to them, really. We were relatively unskilled. We developed our skills through treating people who presented themselves to us in a way, hoping that we would help them, certainly, but their presence to us, since we were not well trained at that point, was a bit of a gift. That's how I would see it. And if you see it as a gift, perhaps it could help us in our orientation toward the service we need to provide to others. Those moments when we might feel somewhat resentful, well, maybe it's a good time to just remind ourselves a bit. Not that I don't feel resentful or exhausted, or I'm just like anyone else, but I can remind myself that, yes, it's a gift to be a doctor or a nurse. I really believe that. Where, so many fields, there's so much just about the finances and the bottom line. And that's not true about being a doctor or a nurse. That's not ultimately what it's about. And it's one of the great pleasures of being a doctor, how we can help other people with our skill.
When we hear the word gift, unfortunately, our minds may go to things that we need to declare that could potentially be conflicts. But you're talking about gift in a totally different way. You're talking about giving the gift of our presence and recognizing the gifts that our patients give us by teaching us, by allowing us to learn from their experience through their experiences. And in your essay, you talk a little bit about appreciating this and have it impact on the culture of medicine. So can you talk a little bit more about how this appreciation of gifts exchanged and time spent together and talents shared can impact favorably on the culture of medicine, even perhaps, as you're hinting, improve our sense of wellness or reduce our risk of burnout?
When we think of our work as partly a gift we can give to others and a gift we have received to others, I believe it enhances our morale and the morale of whatever enterprise we are part of. If we all, I believe, are able to appreciate more of the dimension of gift in healthcare, it has the potential to have us see things differently, organize the way we care for patients and each other differently, and potentially transform our whole system of care. Because finally, it starts with one-to-one encounter, I believe, but the one-to-one encounter is influenced by the larger systems that shape what we're able to do. So I think if we doctors and nurses are able to articulate a gift dimension to care, I think we can help our administrators see it that way. Because I think my experience working with many in administration is they have chosen to work in the field of healthcare because administration wants to see it that way too. Many of our most talented administrators could be working in other fields, finance, law. They could be making more money in other areas, but they chose to enter healthcare because they do want to provide service to others. And it may be that many in administration, but many of those who are responsible for keeping hospitals financially solvent are just as concerned as we doctors are by the overweening presence of financial concerns as they more and more dominate our day-to-day lives as physicians, nurses, and others in healthcare. I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna here. We do have to be able to pay for things, no question about it. And there's no simple solution to any of these problems. And how should healthcare be paid for? Should we have single payer? These are complicated issues, but I think as we think about it, we should think about how we can organize our system of care so that we can further enhance the dimension of gift. That would be the point.
Well, we really appreciate the depth of your reasoning. It certainly is appealing to me, and I hope that it resonates with many of our readers. You've made a very strong pitch here for humanizing and really putting mission front and forward in your incredibly erudite way. So, Alan, how does Levinas enter our conversation, and how does Levinas enter the thinking that you had in putting these pieces together for the essay?
So Levinas is one of the great thinkers of the 20th century. And his core insight is that the reason we are here as human beings, in his view, is to bring the ethical order into being. So we're not here to earn the maximum amount of money. We're not here to face our own mortality. No, we have a specific purpose to bring the ethical order into being. And as doctors and nurses engaged every day in actions that we're trying to help people, he would claim that we should be trying to bring the ethical order into being in healthcare, in our day-to-day actions. He was very focused on the idea of face-to-face ethics, that it's in the experience of the other, seeing the face of the other, that you need to respond. We ought to respond to the needs of the other. At that moment, we're not thinking of ourselves at all. We're just responding to the needs of the other. And in that way, we are bringing the ethical order into being.
So the dimension of gift giving is layered onto this ethical order. How do we put the two thoughts together?
When you give a gift, ideally, you're trying to think about the other. You're trying to think about what the other needs. The gift is not about you. It's about what's going to make the other happy. It's what's going to make the other feel acknowledged. That's what the nature of a gift is. And you're not really expecting anything back. In medicine, too, it's not about what the patient could do for us. It's only about what we can do for the patient and the patient's needs. So it's a true gift of the doctor to the patient. And that's why the patient can feel trust in us, because they sense that it's a gift of us from them. We're not expecting patients to do anything for us. At that moment, we're not expecting them to be paying us, although we hope we'll get paid. We're not expecting them to enroll in a clinical trial, although we might eventually hope that they will. But at that moment, it's pure gift. That's where the trust comes from. The gift comes first, the others later.
So one could argue, Alan, that that is just the ethical conduct of medicine, that there is no extra here, that there is no gift, that is just how we should behave. So help me understand a little bit more then about how you understand gift. From my experience, as I was taught by cultural anthropologists, gift can be a gift of time. Gift can be a gift of presence. And it is those sort of additional things that we convey through our actions or transmit through our presence. Reciprocally, we also are gifted by our patient's presence and by their gift of spending the time they have left with us. How do you understand gift?
Okay, so you're saying a gift is something extra that we add on. Okay, I can accept that. I wouldn't deny that. My point would be that, yes, a gift orientation is central to the ethical practice of medicine. Yes, it is the ethical practice of medicine. But what we're seeing in our current world is that orientation is increasingly threatened. Isn't that what we're seeing? That doctors are selling practices to private equity, that we have more and more for-profit businesses in healthcare. And it seems in too many places, patients fear that the primary focus is not on the gift dimension, but the primary focus more and more seems to be on the mercantile aspect, the money aspect. So my point would be that, yes, we ought to know what the ethical practice of medicine is, but it's too easy to forget, isn't it? And don't we see that that's what's happening? People are forgetting. We all need to be reminded. Who is going to remind us?
Thank you, Alan, for your contribution. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to JCO's Cancer Stories, the Art of Oncology. Don't forget to give us a rating or review, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find all of the ASCO shows at asco.org/podcasts.
The purpose of this podcast is to educate and to inform. This is not a substitute for professional medical care and is not intended for use in the diagnosis or treatment of individual conditions. Guests on this podcast express their own opinions, experience, and conclusions. Guest statements on the podcast do not express the opinions of ASCO. The mention of any product, service, organization, activity, or therapy should not be construed as an ASCO endorsement.